Sassy Mint Grace here. It's the 21st of February, 2023, and I'm going to begin Section B of Chapter 13 of Hope's Kiss. Initially, she rejected the internet after hearing of porn and child sex slavery accomplished through it. Then she began to search spiritual groups. There were hundreds of thousands. She went about learning as much as she could about each site until she came across a request for money, and then she'd abandon it in disappointment. And then she was loaned a couple of books by a friend. This author was involved in the study of a particular philosophy or science, as some referred to it. Being intrigued by the author's writing, MJ began to research online sites dealing with that subject. She found several, but was most interested by the one that featured a short video titled, "What is the Meaning of Life?" That's a pretty heavy question, she thought. What is her answer? She watched it. She watched it over and over again because it was so rich with meaning and that she saw hope. She'd grown up in a so called Christian democracy with no church attendance as a child. Her mother had been practicing Wicca during MJ's adolescence. Many cultures believe we become able to be spiritually conscious at 12 or 13 years old. She saw her mom's spells work and she listened avidly from her room as her mother discussed experiences of astral projection and experimented with pyramid power. MJ's university years introduced her to the Burning Times, the story of the women's Holocaust, the witch hunts where 9 million women were murdered in the name of the Christian God. For a few years, she'd hated the church, not the members, but the institution itself. The corruption there was just beginning to become public. The news began with the sexual abuse at a boys' home in Newfoundland, then one in Louisiana, and then the Catholic school survivors who were routinely molested began to speak out. Eventually, the voices of First Nations abused as children were also heard. Allegations of sexual abuse by priests were widespread, occurring in cities across the US, Canada, and Europe. The Church of the Universe was on its knees in the courts, paying out millions to settlements to victims. MJ had taken philosophy courses in school and discovered Nietzsche and read his essay, The Antichrist. His thesis made good sense. Christianity rationalized suffering in this life for the reward in the next life. It was a perfect religion for slaves because it assured them their just deserts in heaven. Little did she know that down the road she would find something in a Christian community she had never dreamed possible. Back in the 90s, still searching for a way to express her spiritual self, she explored First Nations practices. She believed that there was a higher power since her life was saved by that message in her 20s. Through her travels, she had stumbled onto a 12-step program. The first of the 12 steps is to admit one is powerless and their life is unmanageable. Without that, the other 11 steps are in vain or impossible. Soon she settled on a combination of Celtic pagan and First Nation practices. She would invite a group of people over to celebrate the change of seasons at winter solstice or vernal equinox. Sage or sweetgrass was used to cleanse and purify the apartment and the participants at the onset of the simple ritual, and then a potluck followed by a talking circle finished the evening. She'd been a natural born nature worshiper. She spent most warm weather evenings of childhood outside with her father, meditating on nature's beauty. She was tutored to be quiet so the creatures would show themselves. Once she heard her great grandmother say, "I feel greater communion with God on my hands and knees in a flower bed than I ever did on any church pew." Apparently, this was a famous quote. MJ was most content in the woods or fields near natural watercourses. She felt her body vibrate at the ocean in harmony with the waves and the smell of the sea air. Interestingly, this new concept that she was looking at of reality was appropriate to any person of any sex, race, or religion. For monopoly capitalists, MJ felt we were in the last days of capitalism. The ideas might be rather scary, though. This new philosophy promoted global socialism. This online teacher was educating folks how to build a heaven on earth. He stated unequivocally that humanity has a choice. A, we can go through another world war and those left standing will divide up the spoils, or B, we can all connect to each other and become as one family. MJ had opted to believe that when push come to shove, the reins of the human species will be taken over by altruistic folks rather than the empty, greedy ones in corporate boardrooms. Ultimately, the species would realize they couldn't eat money. What a tremendous comfort it had been to MJ to know that the world was going to have a happy ending, because ultimately the spirit or soul of each being would all be absorbed into the one creature who was embraced by the Creator. At last, the PA announced the landing of their flight. She was relieved to get out of the confinement and into the fresh air, or what passed as fresh air, wherever she was outside of Washington. A large gray sedan waited for them. As she lowered herself onto the back seat, the young officer unceremoniously shoved her by the forehead into the car. When she took off, she tried shifting her wrist to get some relief from the discomfort of the handcuffs. She loathed anything tight against her skin. She finally gave up with a pained sigh and sat back on her seat and stared at the sights from the car windows. Chapter 14. Gary snuck out the back door and ran through the scrub behind the shack he lived in to his uncle's gas station. He hid in the tire shed most of the time until he could hear voices in the garage service bay. Then he would slip into the front entrance and pocket a chocolate bar and try to phone his dad. He'd found a slip of paper in his mother's drawer with a phone number on it and no name, and he believed that this was his father's number because his stepdad was very jealous, and if he found a paper with a man's name and number on it, his mother would be in trouble. The problem was that the numbers had faded and weren't clearly visible. He kept trying the numbers he thought he saw, but unfortunately they'd all been wrong numbers. He listened to be sure the voice continued in the back of the next room and pulled a wrinkled, dirty paper from his pocket. He squinted again to make out the numbers. He dialed 506 450 2852. It rang once, twice, and then on the third ring, a man's voice said, "Hello?" Gary said, "Dad?" and held his breath, waiting for an answer. There was a silence on the other end, and then, "I'm not your dad, but can I help you?" Gary's breath rushed out of him, and tears did too. The voice on the other end asked, "Are you okay? Are you in danger? Maybe you should call 911. Gary sobbed to hear someone who even cared that he was safe. He pretty much brought himself up while his mother worked as a waitress, exotic dancer, and sometimes prostituted herself to get money for her drugs. He lived on peanut butter and fluff sandwiches when there were groceries in the house at all. After Gary's crying quieted, the man on the other end asked, "Are you still there?" Gary nodded, then realized the man couldn't see that and said, "Yeah." The stranger followed with, "Where are you, kid?" Gary answered, "Shrevestown." "What state are you in?" Gary hesitated and then answered, "Georgia." "What's your name?" "Gary." "Looking for your dad, eh?" "Yes, I haven't seen him in almost a year. Too bad. I bet you miss him, eh?" Through his sniffling, the boy responded, "Yes, I want to go live with him." "Your mama not giving you all the love you need?" "Mama isn't too bad, but it's her new boyfriend. He scares me." Gary could hear car doors close and a motor start up. He flung the greasy black receiver back onto its cradle and split from behind the counter as fast as he could. After hearing the crash of the phone on the other end, Jacob said, "Hello? Hello? You still there?" Then he realized that he could hear the dial tone. He pressed the button to hang up the portable phone on the tray of his wheelchair. He wondered how many miles away this kid was. He wondered what kind of life this child was going through to be so desperate to reach his dad. Chapter 15. www.abbaswatchman.com. End Times Prophecy. Start warning everybody you know. Damascus destruction is very near. Keep up with my world news page. Larman. November 1st to 28th. Solar flares in the last 7 days and more may be coming November 1st. This is one of the major signs we're looking for just before Israel is attacked by Russia. Israel still has to gather on their borders, possibly in response to the coming missile war launched by Russia, Syria, and Iran. The deal could come sooner, but watch out for the November 22nd week or December 25th, for the fake 1 week peace deal. Keep watch next week for the next leg of the unfolding peace talks, which happen on the 7th of November, as to where they go from there. Set a date or not for the Geneva Peace 2 conference. Kerry is on tour in the Middle East November 3rd, and it ends on the 9th. Kerry to head to Middle East Sunday with a full agenda. Visit Jerusalem, Bethlehem to discuss final talks November 1st. Also watch for November 3rd solar eclipse to turn to blood. Lucy turned to Harry to see if he was still awake. He met her eyes. She said, "What do you think?" "Well, it's hard to argue the facts. It's all happening now. The American dollar is on the brink of extinction. Once that happened, everything will come unglued. We'll order the National Guard to prevent looting and rioting, but it won't hold for long because there's no money to pay the guard. Then the chaos will be full of bullies helping themselves to whatever they want. No security, no peace, no food. Borders will close down. Fresh water sources will be limited as the water treatment and sewage plants are abandoned by their employees. There's only one way out of this hell." He pulled foil closures off of 2 butterscotch pudding cups on the coffee table. He picked up a bottle of odorless powder and inserted a small measuring spoon into it and lifted it from within, keeping with contents. He placed 1 spoonful of the pudding cup and then returned to the bottle for the second while his wife of 48 years stirred the dried powder into the first pudding. She picked up a second small spoon and stirred the medicine into the other pudding. He set the small bottle on the end table and reached for the bottle of champagne that lay chilling in the ice bucket on the coffee table and poured into the 2 glasses beside it. He picked up one, handed it to her. She picked up one, handed it to him. She leaned in and kissed his lips tenderly and lifted her glass. He looked into her eyes from behind the tears in his. He said, "I have loved you since we were 10 years old. I have loved you more each of the 48 years we have shared on this planet. And if I am to leave, or you are to leave, I want it to be together like everything else we've gone through in this life." He raised his glass and tapped it against hers. She said, "To us," as their glasses touched. They'd gone through 5 pregnancies, 3 miscarriages. Each of the children who were born died within 2 years as a result of a genetic heart defect. The gene hadn't been recognized until their last child had been gone for 10 years. They had built 2 family businesses that had gone bankrupt. She'd survived 2 nervous breakdowns with him by her side and had endured the loss of 1 foot from diabetes. Through it all, they had been hand in hand, hearts linked. He picked up the pudding first and dug the spoon in, then offered it to her. She smiled and opened her mouth. He placed a load of the butterscotch sweetness into her mouth. Then she picked up her spoon and returned the favor to him, each taking turns until the disposable plastic containers were empty. As the best of Haydn's CD played out, they held out each other. They held each other until they fell into a deep, deep sleep. The extramural nurse found them the next morning, dead in each other's arms. She wept at the depth of their dedication to each other and wondered if she would ever know anything like the love they had shared for 48 years. That's it for today. Stay tuned.